right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of the Rankin Technical College Application and Website Development, or AWD 1111 Database Driven Web Development course, I've been creating a series of video presentations. I started with several presentations I created on server-side development, those being HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And those were based off of the valleyofcode.com, where there are several handbooks there by Mr. Flavio Copes. I also went back and added some of the lectures I had done in the AWD 1000 class on JavaScript concepts. Now I'm going in and I'm on page 214 of 306, but I'm going through Mr. Brad Traversy's Web Dev Guide. Mr. Traversy is a self-taught web developer extraordinaire, and I've been going through his stuff in here. And again, like I said, I'm on page 214. So the next thing that's discussed in here is authentication and authorization. Authentication is the process of identifying an individual. Authentication is the process of identifying the individual. Authorization talks about what permissions that individual has. Now, when I get in here in the morning and I log in, I am authenticating myself. I have to go in and give basically my password because it's on my machine. So it already has some of my login stuff in there, okay? After I give my password and I come in there, well, when I go out, as an example here, if I go out here to insiderankin.org, there are certain things once I log in that I can see, such as I can go to academics and I can go to my future courses, which will be my courses in fall, and there they are. So I can get class listings and a bunch of other information. My boss can get the same information because he has been authorized to do so. I can't go in and, for example, I cannot go in and get Mr. Gudmisted's information. He can probably get mine because he is the associate department head or assistant department head or whatever it is, but I can't get his. But he, like me, he has to go and log in when he comes in, so he has to log in so that he can be authenticated. And then based on that authentication, you're given authorization. It's like, what can you do? Now, I want to quickly show you another thing before we go on. It says there's a ton of articles and videos that will talk about it in more depth, and that's true. But this is something I'm doing for a different class. Now, let me see. How do I do this? Come on. That should be big enough. All right. So when we are working and connecting to SQL Server, if you look on here, it talks about authentication. If I choose Windows authentication, which is the default here, then notice username and password, both of these are grayed out. What that means is, once I've been authenticated using my Windows credentials, I am also authorized to come in and use SQL Server. On the other hand, if instead of Windows authentication, I had clicked this down arrow and I had chosen SQL Server authentication, then these would have been ungrayed and I would have had to have set up a username and a password. So you can have different levels of authentication is what I'm coming down, what I'm talking about here. When it comes to SPAs or single page apps running on a client, JSON Web Tokens or JWTs are a common way to authenticate. The user validates their username or email and password when the token is assigned on the server and sent back to the client. It can include the user's state. The user then has to send that exact token in the HTTP headers. If they don't, there's a mismatch and it won't work. So here's the thing for more, but the point is it's pretty similar, to what I was just talking about. Another way to authenticate and authorize, really authentication, is cookies and sessions. All right. Cookies are basically small text files that the server writes to the client machine. They're not executable. Typically, I believe they're about 4K max in length. All right. A session is typically set up when you log in or you go into a site or you do something. You are given, unbeknownst to you, but you are given a session ID. And that way you can be tracked. So for instance, if I go out to Amazon, I'm sure that somewhere in there I get a session ID. So that if I get in there and I decide that I want to, I don't know, I want to buy something, let's say, and I put it in my cart and I buy it. Then I log out. Well, now that session ID should go away, because if that was kept active and somebody else was able to find that session ID, they could go in as me and start buying a bunch of stuff. That wouldn't make me very happy. OAuth, as it says, is another popular way to validate users. It's an open standard. So basically it says you can log into a website or an app with your Google account or using Twitter, Facebook, GitHub, and a lot of other ways. Okay, and a lot of apps allow you to do it that way. There are authentication libraries to help you implement authentication. Passport for Node.js is a common one. But what can you do? Well, one thing you don't want to do is to store your password in what's called plain text or clear text. So if my password is hello123, which would be a stupid password, but if it was, at a minimum, I should hash the password and encrypt it using something like bcrypt so it would change, all right? And it wouldn't be, especially if I'm storing this in a database. I don't want it stored in clear text or plain text. I want it to be encrypted. When you use tokens or cookies and sessions, you need to send these with your HTTP request to your API. So you learn to build your API in a way to protect certain routes. For instance, if you have a route for creating a blog post, you don't want anybody to be able to create a post for that person. They should have to log in and give the correct information. Otherwise, as it says, they get a 403 error. Remember that the 400 errors mean that it's on the client side, which meant you are not authorized. So if you, let's say that you are not registered at a site and you attempt to go in there, typically what will happen is you'll get pushed to a login page. And if you don't have a valid login, you'll be pushed to some page where you can create a login. There's two-factor identification, where it says here sometimes a username and a password is not enough. All right, so you may have to respond to an SMS code, a number, or whatever. And there are a lot of libraries that will help you do that. All right, let's get into deploying full stack apps. There's different things that you can use. On the front end, we will be using Netlify, and on the back end, we will be using Heroku. There are a lot of different hosting platforms available. All right, when we go in, and this isn't hosting per se, but when we go in and we set up our MongoDB stuff, it'll ask basically what provider do we want to use, and I think that AWS or Amazon Web Services, I believe, is the default. We are going to use Heroku. Heroku is fairly easy to use. It's, I think at least, fairly intuitive, and it goes by something called dynos. All right. If you are going to have a website that's not going to get a lot of traffic, then Heroku provides a free option that you can use. Now, if you start having thousands of people go to your site every day, it won't be free anymore. You'll be told basically that you'll have to get a paid account. You can host a lot of things, including Node.js, apps here. There's DigitalOcean, which I have heard of, and I've watched a video on it, but I've never done any work with it. All right. When we go in and we use XAMPP, 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 whatever you want to call it, when we go in and we use this, maybe you remember this. If we click on this, now we're starting up an Apache web server. If we click on this, now we're starting up MySQL. Apache is very popular in the PHP world. That's all true. Containers and virtualization is way over my head, so I'm not going to talk about it. I have never used Docker or Kubernetes. I've heard it pronounced Kubernetes. I've never used it regardless. I've not used Vagrant. I have not used Cloudinary, Amazon S3. All right. So to wrap up this section, and this is probably going to be very short, we're only at 11 minutes, but I want to start a new paragraph with a new lesson. All right. It says to wrap up what you should be able to do as a back-end or full-stack developer. You should know a programming language, whatever one you're going to be using. You should know a database or databases. All right. You should understand the concept of RESTful APIs. You should understand what authentication is and authorization is. You should at least be able to bring up the terminal and run some simple commands. And you should know about the different deployment options that are available. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to pick it up. And I believe this next chapter is also short. All right, it's called Beyond the Browser. So when you look here, this is where we are. We've done chapter 1, we've done chapter 2, we've done chapter 3, we've done chapter 4, and now we're going to move into chapter 5, which, as you can see, is only about 10 pages long. So this will be a time. So this is about 10 pages long, and the trends thing is not real long either. So I think I'll combine chapters 6 and 7 together, then go into, 5 and 6 together, then go into 7, and 8 is where we, I believe, finish it all up. Okay, good. So I will be back to continue on this journey in just a couple moments.